Please join me in welcoming Matt.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be here. As soon as I heard that there was a USIP teachers program, I wanted to be a part of it. As I shared with the group yesterday, my parents met in the Peace Corps in Kenya in '68. My wife's parents met in the Peace Corps in Ecuador in '67. My wife speaks to our boys only in Spanish. We went to Cambodia on our honeymoon, and I named my son after the capital of Ethiopia. So we love this stuff. I want to share my perspective on how schools oftentimes teach about peace building and activism. And I think there's probably no person who's talked about more in U.S. schools than Dr. King. And although he's a hero of mine, and I'm sure of yours, I have some issues with the way we teach about him and about activism and peace building in general. The quote here that we see is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And I think that in some ways that's a counterproductive message to give to students, because I'd ask you right now, do we know that the arc is going to bend towards justice when it comes to healthcare or North Korea? Do we know that? I don't think we know that. I think it depends on the actions of people who are active. And so in giving this narrative that's a little bit too simple, that makes it seem like someone like Dr. King was so great that he came along, he woke us from our slumber and all was well, we also risk giving them a narrative that's pretty uninteresting, as though everything was destined to work out the right way. So if we were to teach students in a way that I think is maybe more befitting of the true struggle of Dr. King, we would also talk with students about his struggles. We'd talk about when he went to Chicago, and he said, "These mobs are more vicious than anything I've seen down south." We'd talk about when he started speaking out about Vietnam and he lost many members of his coalition. We'd talk about the fact that for the last 10 years of his life, Time Life magazine said that he was one of the 10 most despised Americans. We would mention those, and in mentioning those, we give the students a realistic, complex portrait of what it means to be an activist. So for this year, my students and I, we really focused on people who were activists and peace builders, and we used the USIP toolkit, and we used a lot of resources around us. So one of the things that we did at the very beginning is we asked these 4 foundational questions. What are the impediments to peace in this particular case? Whatever case we were studying at the time. 2, what are the opportunities for peace? 3, in what ways is or are the issues more complicated than they initially seem to us? And then 4, what tactics and strategies would an activist or peacemaker need to use in addressing these? So we reach out to activists all around the world and all around the US. And in October, we were really fortunate. We got to meet with Bryan Stevenson. And for those of you guys who are watching this at home, you can't see there are literally thousands of people in this room right now. Can you raise your hand here if you know Bryan Stevenson and his work? Okay, so for those of you who know, he's phenomenal. He's the author of Just Mercy. He's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. He spent his last 30 years working with people, primarily poor folks who are on death row in southern states. People for whom life is very bleak. And Bryan shared several insights with my students, and I'd like to share these with you as well. Bryan said, one of the things is that the roots of the issues that you're dealing with are long and profound, and that you do nobody any service when you just jump in right now in 2017 and want to know what's happening. He said, you need to go back and you need to study. So as a history teacher, that warmed my heart. And then he said, oh, after you study, you need to talk. He said, I don't think we've ever had a very frank conversation around race. The next thing that he said to my students, he said, we need to be proximate. So if you care about people who are suffering in prisons, you know where you need to be is not creating the next app and not blogging about it. You need to get to the prisons. You need to work with folks. Finally, he told my students, you need to be prepared to lose many battles along the way. And Bryan talked about for the first 20 years of his career, he felt like he was shouting and no one would listen. And now he's had some more success. He doesn't have to shout and more people listen, but it's not easy. In terms of giving students a complex portrait of what activism looks like, we don't only talk with people who are very accomplished. We also, oh my goodness, that's out of order. We also talk with young folks. So up here, I'm going to go off here for a second. This young woman is named Jordan Owen. And Jordan is a former student of mine, and she's a student at the University of Wisconsin. She was the only non-Indigenous member from the University of Wisconsin who was selected to go to North Dakota during the DAPL protests. And Jordan talked with the students about what it was that she hoped to do down there, and I thought it was a really fascinating conversation. In essence, she said, I don't have a lot of credibility in that community. That's not my fight, but my fight is when I go back to my community and I can show them the footage of the video that I'm making, and I can talk with my community about our connection to this issue. One other person that we were able to talk with, and I want to give a big shout out to everybody here at USIP, was John Kerry. And we talked with John Kerry about a couple of issues. One is this issue of fake news and how frustrating it feels when you're somebody who really cares deeply about the world, and you feel that the other side, regardless of which side you're on, you feel the other side is just not respecting the facts. And we also talked to him about the rise of populism in a whole host of places, not only with the Brexit vote, the American election, but also Holland, France, and Germany. And because the students wanted to Skype with him, and they really wanted to pick his brains about how do we as activists, as people who care about justice, get us out of this hole that we're in where we can't even respect the other side, they conducted hundreds of interviews. I mean, they Skyped with people in Amsterdam. They Skyped with protesters in Paris. I had one dad get mad at me because his son had to make a phone call to Germany. But that's the kind of work that we were after. When you're an activist, you pursue something. If it means you talk to somebody at midnight your time, you talk to them. And so when we talk with Secretary Kerry, one of the things that I thought was really profound is we never endeavored to solve anything. Right? You can't solve this. This is too complex. But we talked to him about, here are our ideas for how you might address this. And he gave us feedback. And I talked to a parent who 2 weeks later was on a flight with him coming back from Dubai, and the parent said, hey, Secretary Kerry, my kid talked to you and he thought you were, and Kerry said, from North Carolina? And Dad said, yeah, and he goes, those kids are going someplace. Moving along, one of the things we did is, so we normalized talking with activists. We had them in our classroom all the time. And then the students decided that they wanted to read a book by or about an activist. And you can see this list of books up here. But they're really different, right? So the first one, It's Our Turn to Eat, is about the whistleblower John Gathongo in Kenya. The next book, in some ways, was my favorite. It's called The Last Thousand, and it's about a member of an ethnic minority in Afghanistan and a man from within that group who founds a school. That particular group is very tied to the U.S. military, so when the U.S. military decides to leave, life becomes very precarious for this group. The third one was War Child. It's about a child soldier from the South Sudan. The fourth one is about someone we really struggled with. Is he an activist? The macroeconomist Jeff Sachs. But we decided that he was, because through his Millennium Villages project, he was really trying to bring about great change in some of the world's poorest communities. And then fifth, some of the students read the Nick Kristof, Cheryl Wu Dunn book, Half the Sky, about women's movements and empowerment. And I think a lot of interesting things happened here, and I'd like to share three with you. One of the things is because the students were well-versed in thinking and talking about activism, they were able to really critique the people who they were reading about. Right, so for example, when we were reading The Last Thousand, the man who founds a school that's primarily for female students, is always telling them, you need to be activists. But at the point where the American troops are mainly leaving Afghanistan, he says, you can't be activists anymore. You're putting your lives on the line. And the students feel betrayed by him. And so my students, in reading this, they had these really philosophical discussions about when is it actually irresponsible to be an activist, and what does it mean to be a good activist, and when do you pursue short-term gains and when do you pursue long-term gains. Not only were students talking in interesting ways about their books, but we would stop periodically and they would talk with people who were reading other books. So we were going to have this cross-fertilization where we're talking about what does activism look like in different contexts. And then in all but one case, the students were able to Skype or speak by phone with the authors or subjects of the books. So in doing this work, the students were doing some amazing things. They were asking critical questions. They were getting excited about people's potential to change the world. And they were thinking about how could they too design plans that were capable of changing the world. So I'll wrap up here by talking about on a micro and a macro level. On a micro level, when students get excited about peace building and activism, here's something that can happen. This is one of my favorite students, Pa Lala. Pa is from the Karen group within Burma. She's a refugee. We talk about grit all the time in schools. Pa is undoubtedly the grittiest student who I know, if you just know her story simply to get to the U.S. She recently received the Curtis Scholar Award, and basically means that she's one of 4 students in the United States who's going to be flown by the group Global Citizen to South Africa this summer to meet with folks there. And she's going to receive a year of mentoring. And her activist project is she's trying to bring together students from different ethnic groups at our school, not only in academic classes, but socially outside of class. And finally, I'd say when students get excited about activism and peace building, this is what it can look like on a larger level. This is the last day of my class, my global issues class, and here the students are presenting their own research about an issue that animated them. So we have students doing incredibly different things. One student in the back corner I can see, she's talking about the connection between social class and health outcomes in India. Another girl is talking about vertical farming and the possibility it offers an increasingly urbanized China to attend to some of its problems. And that's, I think, what my message is for you is when students get excited about this sort of work and you ask them, like, can you present it to people? It's not a chore. It's really a privilege. So in wrapping up, I'd like to thank the USIP for their incredible help in assisting my students become more thoughtful about becoming peacemakers and activists. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.